Honorable Matthew Samuda, MP, Minister of Water, Environment and Climate Change, Dr. Sharon Morrison, JP, Director General here in the Ministry, Chief Technical Director, Ms. Gillian Guthrie, Mr. Peter Clark, Managing Director of the Water Resources Authority, Mr. Evan Thompson, Principal Director, Meteorological Service of Jamaica, heads of divisions within the ministry, members of the Integrated Water Resources Management Council, other officers from the ministry and its portfolio agencies. I'd like to also recognize Mr. Delano Williams, Corporate Communications and Public Relations, National Water Commission. Members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you all very well. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Ministry of Water, Environment and Climate Change. This is a very important press conference that is being convened today against the background of the drought conditions affecting the island. So today we gather at a critical time for our nation as we face the ongoing challenges associated with the severe drought conditions. The situation underscores the urgent need for coordinated and decisive action, innovative solutions, and sustained commitment to safeguarding our vital water resources. Just this morning, going into the afternoon, the Water Resources Management Council, Integrated Water Resources Management Council, the IRRMC, chaired by Samuda, our minister, met to discuss matters related to the drought and actions that are being taken to address the various challenges. The meeting included representatives from various ministries, departments, and agencies, and various updates were provided which speak to our collective efforts to manage and conserve water more effectively. Their insights highlight both the progress we have made, however, more importantly, the clear and present danger posed by the drought, and I should also include, with the advent of the El Nino phenomenon, the situation has become more extreme. In fact, El Nino is expected and projected to go as far into next year, early spring, and should reach its maximum or its peak between October and December of this year. So ladies and gentlemen, you understand the challenges that I'm referring to. So our focus today, ladies and gentlemen, is to update the public on current drought situation, but also to highlight the actions being taken or actions that we intend to take to mitigate the risks. We also intend to outline the steps that we are taking to ensure that water security is at the forefront of the ministry's thrust. I will just provide an overview of the program. We will firstly go into the presentation segment, and that will be done firstly by Mr. Evan Thompson, then Peter Clark, and Mr. Clark will be followed by Mr. Delano Williams from the MWECC. Thereafter, we'll have remarks from Honorable Samuda, Minister, and then the question and answer segment will close the proceedings. So ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, I now hand over to Mr. Evan Thompson, who will deliver his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, P.S. Robertson, and a very good afternoon to all. Minister Samuda, good afternoon, and all persons gathered here, the media in particular, and of course the Jamaicans who are watching online or who will be receiving this information secondhand through the media. Thank you so much for joining us. I do want to just share with you what the rainfall and drought situation currently is across the country. This is the latest update that we have. We will be updating this in another 2 weeks or so, but this is our latest position. So moving to our next slide, it shows us the picture. Literally the picture of what we are experiencing across Jamaica, and this is up to the end of June. At the end of June, what the rainfall situation looked like here in Jamaica. You see on the image that at the top is the larger picture showing what the June 2026 looked like, but at the bottom of the picture it shows what the normal year would look like in that picture. So we can see where the reds, the oranges are contained. Those are the drier areas where you see some greens and blues. That would indicate where we have wetter areas across the country, at least during the month of June. And at the end of that period, we recognized that we had 10 of our 13 parishes. I'm saying 13 because Kingston and St. Andrew is considered one parish in this respect. And so we have 13 areas, regions that we're monitoring, and they all received rainfall in varying degrees during the month of June. 10 of 13 actually were experiencing below normal rainfall. And when we speak about normal rainfall, we're talking about the 30-year average, and this is from 1991 to 2020. So that 30-year period is what is defining our climatological mean or our climatological normal, and we assess in a comparison with that period from month to month. So the month of June, we're seeing the picture there showing that more of the rainfall amounts were seen toward the eastern end of the island, parts of Portland and getting into northern parts of St. Thomas. And that is in comparison to what we see on our general mean rainfall image, where it's lots more yellows and oranges that we would normally experience at this time of the year. July is really what we consider our midsummer drought month. The wet season in a general sense starts in about May and it continues through to November. And of course, you have two peaks in that, where you have October, the main peak, and May, the secondary peak. And then in that general wet season, July would be the month with the least amount of rainfall climatologically. So it's considered the midsummer drought month. The drought conditions are being experienced in just 4 of our parishes so far, and this is at the end of June, I must remind you. And in July, you would have seen that the rainfall was still very little, very scant across the island, and so we would have not experienced that much of a change positively, but we may have seen an exacerbation of the drought conditions with it extending to more of our parishes. But at the end of June, St. Elizabeth, St. James, St. Anne, and St. Mary were the parishes that were determined to be experiencing drought conditions. Manchester and St. Catherine were both basically on the borderline in that they were just about moving toward drought conditions. So it's most likely that, having not experienced significant rainfall during the month of July, that situation would have been worsened. So we should be seeing that drought conditions at least would have extended to these 2 parishes. That's what we're expecting to pick up after the month of July has ended and we begin to gather and collate and compare our data. So taking a look at our next slide, one of the main reasons for the dry conditions, yes, we do have climate change to talk about, but climate variability is one of the things that generally impacts us on a regular basis. And one of those variabilities in the climate has to do with the El Niño phenomenon. We've been talking about it. We projected it even before it began to develop across the region. And so we did expect that we would have been seeing lesser than normal amounts of rainfall and higher than normal temperatures. And that's exactly what we've been experiencing over the past couple of months. The El Niño actually was generated in June, at the early part of June, and we see that it has continued to get stronger and stronger going through July, and is expected to continue that trend. So the image you're seeing here tells us that it will continue to strengthen. P.S. Robertson mentioned it earlier. It will continue to strengthen going through to the end of the year, and even into the first quarter of next year at least. It could continue further, but of course we continue to monitor, we continue to project, and as more data comes in, we see how it's developing and how it will continue to develop as we go through the period. The strength of the event is proportional to the probability of unusual and extreme weather impacts, including higher temperatures and fewer rainfall occurrences. It doesn't mean we will have no rainfall. It just means that the number of incidents of rainfall will be fewer. However, we could have a bout of rainfall that is intense, and so we could have very small areas that experience some maybe even flooding events in small areas as these systems develop and as they continue to affect us. But generally, we will experience dry conditions. Moving to in this slide, we see that the latest El Niño temperatures were measured at about 1.2 degrees Celsius, which is the deviation from the normal temperatures. So at 0.5 degrees, we consider it an El Nino. It has moved past that to 1.2 degrees. When it gets to 1.5, 2 degrees, we consider it a major El Nino event. In some cases, it is referred to as a super El Nino, getting past 2 degrees above the normal temperature. And this has to do not with the sea surface temperatures in the Caribbean, but the sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean that has this impact globally, where some areas have drought, some areas have flooding, some areas have very high temperatures, some have lower temperatures, and so it varies across the globe. And our situation calls for drier conditions with an El Nino and also warmer temperatures. The likelihood of a strong El Nino has also risen to 55% for the July, August, September period, the 3-month period. Then when we look at the August, September, October 3-month period, we see that increasing even for being at about 48% the probability, but going towards October, November, December, we see that percentage likelihood of development increasing to 80%. So we are expecting that is about when we will experience the peak of the El Nino before you start to see it unraveling going through 2027. Looking at our next slide, our rainfall outlook probabilities. During the period, this period of August, September, October, the 3-month period, this picture will actually be painting what we are expecting, and we're not seeing very much green inside there. So we are expecting below normal temperatures over this period, and the probability of that ranges from 40 to 50% in most areas, but in the south central parts of the island, we see it extending from southern St. Elizabeth through Manchester and Clarendon, going into St. Catherine, and with those browns that you see on the image showing percentages of a greater probability than even 60%, we're likely to see the drying out of those parishes. So it's likely that those areas will see the more intense dryness that we experience during this period going through to October. The probability of 50% and higher, as we see, is where I pointed to in the south central parts of the country. Moving to our next slide, the maximum temperature outlook. Just to give you an idea, this is really just a kind of snapshot to say what parts of the island are likely to see higher than normal temperatures or lower than normal temperatures, not rainfall, but temperatures. And the orange in the northwest parts of St. James, it really refers to western parts of the country. We are expecting higher than normal temperatures and the probability being over 50%. In the central part of the island, we could see about a 40% chance of it also being below normal. And for the east, it's not very definitive, or there is less certainty, but there is also a great chance that the eastern part of the island will also see below normal temperatures, but with a lower percentage probability. Moving to our next slide, I wanted to give you an image of the near real time in terms of what we're seeing now. So these 3 images show what kind of progression we are expecting over the next month of August. In the first week of August, that's the image on the left, I almost said the west, but it's the left picture. We're seeing that we are expecting dryness still. We're seeing the oranges, we're not seeing the greens, we're not seeing much of the whites over Jamaica either. They are farther to the north, but what we're seeing is the yellows, oranges over Jamaica and to the south. And that's the image that we are seeing for the first week. So it's still looking like lower than normal rainfall. This is a rainfall outlook we're looking at for August. In the second week, this would go now from the 10th to about the 16th of the month. We are expecting that will be a similar picture. We're still seeing a similar picture like the first one, but then on the third picture on the right, we're seeing it even getting more intense. The third week of August, we're looking for more of the oranges closer to Jamaica. So we're not seeing very much of a break where the rainfall is concerned over Jamaica for the month of August. As we move to the next slide, we look at the temperatures now and the changes that we are expecting where temperature is concerned. And we're seeing in the first week, temperatures will be above normal. Second week, similarly. Third week, we're seeing it drifting a little bit more to the north with a little break in the whites coming closer to the eastern side. Not much a little bit of hope, I suppose, a spark of hope, but this could very well change in a week or so. So it is still looking like higher than normal temperatures right through the month of August. And August is when we would normally experience the highest temperatures across the island. I'm going to be closing with one final slide because the impact of dryness and higher temperatures, climate conditions generally for us, would also mean an impact on the vegetation, on the land, on agriculture. And you know, our food security is very important to us. And this is what we're seeing from our bushfire warning index, something that was developed a couple of years ago, and we have had it in operation, where we collaborate with certain agencies, in particular the Jamaica Fire Brigade, and also the Ministry of Agriculture with the Rural Agricultural and Development Agency or Authority, that are also monitoring the possible development of bushfires. And I have to mention that this is primarily climate-induced bushfires. Yes, people will throw cigarette butts, or they might light fires in certain areas, and that is another trigger for bushfires. But this is where the dryness is going to contribute, or it will make those situations even more intense, because the climate conditions creating the perfect scenario for that generation and development of the bushfires because of some ignition. It could even be a lightning in ignition if we do get the clouds and the thunderstorms and lightning. But if we do have that, it could also mean a source of bushfires. So the areas showing highest risks of development of climate-induced bushfires are in the eastern section of the country, where you see those oranges. You also see some pockets of orange spread over central and western parishes, and that means that there is also some vulnerability in other parishes, but the likelihood of outbreaks in bushfires from the climate cause is more likely over eastern parishes. So that's where I will leave the presentation, not looking particularly positive, but it's something, the challenge is we just have to understand how we're going to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Thompson. Thank you very much for that update. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not business as usual. The risks are clear and present, and we have to manage accordingly. And that's us here at the ministry working in partnership with the myriad ministries, departments, and the agencies. Now, for those who may not know, and I want to take this opportunity to recognize those who have taken the time out of their very busy schedule to join us via the YouTube platform. Good afternoon to you, and thanks for joining. The Met Service plays a critical role in monitoring weather, analyzing climate data, and providing periodic updates in respect of weather conditions generally. At this time, now ask Peter Clark, the Managing Director of the Water Resources Authority, to make his presentation. Just to, we use this as a teachable moment as well. The Water Resources Authority regulates, protects, and manages the island's water resources. So they play a very critical role in the water sector. So Mr. Clark, could you come forward, please? Thank you.
Thank you, P.S. Robertson. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Minister. Good afternoon to the public that are watching and listening. Yeah, I am Peter Clark, and I represent the Water Resources Authority. Quickly, the next slide would show that the Water Resources Authority is largely responsible for the management and the abstractions for water resources across Jamaica. The authority has been tasked with this by law since 1995. So we obtain data, we store and compile data, we develop, very importantly, a master plan, which I'll explain a little bit about. We control water quality, and we also allocate water through a licensing mechanism. One of the big things in managing Jamaica is to know where your water resources are and to have a grasp of quantities. And so we've divided Jamaica into 10 hydrological basins, major large catchment basins. And from these basins, we have major rivers and major waterways. And those are what we use as our overall management tool. So we've divided it into 10 hydrologic basins. From this now, we can now use the data that we have to develop a master plan. We've been charged by the law and by the act to update this master plan occasionally, and we are now in the process of doing the 2027 update of the Water Resources Master Plan. We have looked at, in the last update, we looked at an event horizon of up to 2080. And in the last update to the master plan, we incorporated in that also the impact and effect of climate change. We recognize already the impact of climate variability, but the long-term, long-lasting effects of climate change are very important. We recognize that it is a real and clear and present effect, and so it is incorporated in it. So the 2027 update is ongoing, and the diagram just shows that for us, very important the way I put this here, for us, our only hydrological input is rainfall. So we don't have snowfall, we don't have glacier melt, we don't have all of the other things. Our thing is rainfall, and it means that our whole hydrological regime responds to rainfall or lack thereof. In managing the water resources, we monitor both groundwater and surface water. So for groundwater, we monitor at over 200, nearly 300 points. These are wells that are situated across the island. These are wells that maybe they may be privately owned, they may be owned by state agencies like the National Water Commission or the National Irrigation Commission. I mean, NIC themselves have 90 wells. A lot of people don't even know that they have so many wells, and they're pulling so much water all over for agricultural purposes. So in the data that we obtain from the abstraction measures that are in place, we use that also to monitor groundwater. On the other hand, for surface water, if you can go ahead, for surface water, we monitor over 123 points. Jamaica is still a land of wood and water. Largely, of course, a lot of our resources are groundwater or aquifers and so on, but we do have a lot of streams. In this, what you look at here is called a blue line measure. And when you look at the blue line measure, you can see that we have a lot of surface water. You'll also see where a lot of the surface water is in terms of the spatial dimension, that it is largely to the east of the island. So it means that for the east of the island, a lot of the water systems that are there will be dependent on surface water, while for the center and the west of the island, a lot of those water systems that are there owned by the National Water Commission or others, the municipal corporations and so on, those will be more pulling on groundwater. So this is very important to us because it comes back to what I said about precipitation earlier, and precipitation being the input. In that, when you have low precipitation, then it means the systems that are served by the surface water, rivers that you're taking water from, those systems will be impacted more quickly. So we're going to just look at basically two rivers across the island. So one is on the west, one is on the east. So the Leith River is in Hanover. And what we're seeing when we look at the Leith River, what we call the Q90 is basically the amount of water that you can expect that the river carries 90% of the time. And 90% of the time, it carries roughly 12.3 million gallons per day. And that is a lot of water, 12.3 million gallons. For April 2026, the overall flow was 20.4. And for 2025, last year, when you compare the same period, it was 22.2, which shows that between last year and this year, the river is carrying less water. And you can compare that to 2022, when we had really good rains, and we had the whole of our climate was cooperating with us, let us say. At that time, we were getting up to 56.8 million gallons from April, and then you can see also for May. So you can see that between April and May, there was a significant drop. But also you can see that between last year and this year, there's a significant drop. So we're a little bit worse off where we are now in terms of the river than last year. And the next one that I have is the Yalas River, which is now on the east of the island. And for the Yalas River, with a Q90 yield of 35.8, we can see that it is definitely lower. And this is of even more impact for us because this is one of our major sources of water, bringing water into the corporate area through the Yalas pipeline. So this tells us that the Mona Reservoir, which received the water from Yalas pipeline, will be and is at risk. It tells us that we're at a little bit more risk now than we were last year, and it also tells us that, clearly the care has to be taken, the measures have to be taken. What are these measures going to be? Well, we anticipate, of course, that with everything else, trucking will increase. There will be some amount of trucking that will increase. There have always been water quality concerns, but the Ministry of Health stepped in 2 years ago, and they have developed water trucking guidelines. So that has allayed a lot of the concerns about trucking, and the National Water Commission themselves, who have been a part of the major source of water that truckers would get water from loading bays, they have their own regime to guarantee, to secure the quality of the water that's being delivered, and to guarantee that what is being delivered by trucking, not only by the Water Commission, but by the other truckers who purchase water from them, that it is of a standard and quality that is good and fit for the public. Of course, rainwater harvesting always is proposed and promoted. We do know, for instance, that right now the Rural Water Supply Limited, they have been charged to continue to build out rainwater harvesting systems in schools. Our schools and our students are very vulnerable, and so as a result of that, they do get some amount of budget support for this. Also, the collection of catchments for community catchments, as you can see the picture on the right there, those are important. And as we go forward with developments now, for instance, the Greater Bernard Lodge development and other developments, a part of what we have proposed and has been accepted by the developers is that they'll put in detention ponds and swales and so on, so that more water can be captured to go into groundwater. Because at the end of the day, as we recognize that our groundwater reserves are stronger reserves than our surface water reserves, we also recognize that our groundwater is actually storage for us, and it's storage that is now being kept away from evaporation and so on. So it is the storage that it becomes your fail-safe storage. Let's put it that way, because it is large. It accepts water, and it remains almost, whatever you put there almost remains there because there's less evaporation. We recognize the need for improvement in the watersheds. As we speak, we are collaborating with the Forestry Department in how we can help to rehabilitate watersheds. They are very important, and also for the wetlands, also important to us. Now, the map on the right is it's essentially the land cover for Jamaica, and we developed this map very closely with the Forestry Department using data and information from the Forestry Department, and so this helps us in our own deliberations and our own actions with them as we move forward to determine which watersheds, and we break it out into more granulated areas, and then we can now determine the watersheds that will need attention and so on for our medium-term actions. Not a tomorrow action, but our medium-term actions. One of the things that's been happening is that, for instance, our major partners like the National Water Commission and the Rural Water Supply Limited, who build out water supply systems, there are proposed systems, and there are actionable systems, and there are active systems that are now in the progress of being built out. For instance, the Western Resilience Water Supply Project. And so these become a part of the overall response to let us have some amount of, the word is resilience, to let us have some amount of resilience. We're also building a rare Cobra water treatment plant that we've done the abstractions for, we've done the calculations in terms of how much can be taken, and that is happening with the Water Commission. The private, when I say private, a lot of that is hotels really, who are augmenting supplies and augmenting their own needs by putting in wells, so that they are less dependent on the public supply, and that in itself now frees up more of the public supply for other distributions. And we'll close off, if we can just go ahead, just remembering that at the end of the day, what we all can do is the water hours, the reservation of water, the reuse of water, the reclamation of water, the reduction in use, all of these things. Because every bit that we can save, every drop that we can save will be precious and will help us to be resilient as we go through these periods like this. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mr. Clark, for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I did say that this press conference also serves as a teachable moment for all Jamaicans, and I'm sure you were able to understand the work of the Water Resources Authority after that presentation. And more importantly, the challenges that we face as a nation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what's a constant in all of this? Climate change. And this ministry also has portfolio responsibility for climate change. So, because of climate change and the risks associated, we are seeing hotter and feeling hotter temperatures, right? We're also seeing rising sea levels. What else are we seeing? Drier conditions. And we can relate to that when we drive around Jamaica. We're seeing, we look at the grass and the grass is just dry. So those are the challenges. In fact, between 2015 and 2025, it has been recorded as the hottest decade on record. Hottest. In fact, Jamaica in 2019, June to be exact, recorded its hottest temperature of 39.1 degrees Celsius. Ladies and gentlemen, I did say it's not business as usual. I'll now ask Mr. Delano Williams to come forward. Mr. Delano Williams is from the Corporate and Public Relations Division of the National Water Commission. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, PS, and let me just stand on the protocols that have been established earlier. Good morning and good afternoon, rather, to everyone. Thank you for allowing us to speak on matters of great importance. PS, at several instances throughout his presentation, has spoken to just the realities that are around us, and you would have heard both from the Met Office and also from the representative from the Water Resources Authority an outline of very real things happening with our water and overall climate change. But to bring it a little closer to you is obviously what is happening with your water supply. Am I right? And so let's talk about, we have called it the drought update in terms of technical appropriateness. There may be some contestation with that, but the reality is there are a number of water supply systems that serve you that we are now concerned about. And so as I advance my slides, the NWECC provides water to over 550,000 customers using an average of, say, 4 persons per household, which is what a customer represents for us. That's just about 2.2 million persons on the island. From those, out of that, we actually utilize just about 450 sources. And I want you to follow me now. So 450 sources, 2/3 of those are what you call surface sources, rivers or springs. Peter Clark would have spoken to the fact that a number of those sources now are actually showing signs of decline, especially in the parishes of St. Mary and Portland, some sections of St. Anne, and also what we call East Rural, West Rural, KSA, all right? Now, we've narrowed down even further, just about 133 of that systems, which are historically prone to drought or water supply decline. A lot of them, as I said, are what you call surface sources. And so on screen, it's really a subset of that. We are now looking at 73 in particular, spread across the island, which are already showing decline ranging from 20% drops to some as much as 80% drops. All right? Over time, we will publish on our channel and through our various communique the details of those, because the supply times and the adjustment will vary per system. But as you can see, KSAT, which includes Kingston, St. Andrew, and St. Thomas, represent 35 of the Eastern Division for us. St. Catherine, primarily North St. Catherine, and also North Clarendon, are the areas that we are seeing some drought having an impact on our sources. And then the Northeast Belt, over a dozen for Portland, over a dozen of those systems for St. Mary, and a smaller number for St. Anne is where we are also seeing. While there is some drying in the weather conditions for our western side, we're actually not yet seeing a significant decline with our sources. So St. James, Trelawney, perhaps, primarily in South St. James and also South Trelawney, is where there may be some decline at this point. But our sources have been holding up to a large extent. I want to, as we go, though, just narrow down on one or two of the major systems that you will readily ask me about. And so as I advance the next slide, I want to pinpoint for you the Mona system. And as at today, to the first table to the far right, you're seeing 62%. And to give you some context of what has been happening over the last 3 years, 2025, Mona was at this very day at 39.3. And the year before, in terms of 2024, it was reflecting 81.8. That on account of perhaps the May-June rains, which came true to form at that time. But for this year, we've not necessarily seen that. The Hermitage on the right of screen shows you, again, a similar presentation from 2024, 98%. In 2025, 45%. And this year, pretty much almost along the same trend, 47.4. We have started regulations, which means restricted water supply, or what you call scheduled water supply, on the Constant Spring network since July 3rd. And you will also note on screen that the Mona restrictions are slated to commence this coming Monday, August 3rd, which will mean for a lot of the persons, customers, locations, from Ligani all the way down to Mountain View, sections of New Kingston, Crossroads, Vineyard Town, you can expect to see a general supply time between 6 a.m. each day and 6 p.m. All right? As we let that sink in a little bit, we talk about what we're doing, because we don't want it to seem a context of just presenting the realities of water supply. We do have these sources that are prone or impacted, but let us talk you through what is necessary for the immediate and why these restrictions would come into play. So one of the things we do in terms of moving water to you to keep your communities, your homes, your businesses active is what we call water supply transfer. So for instance, in the Kingston metropolitan area, there is an interconnection between the Constant Spring network on the western side of the city. The Mona network converges with it just about where the Ministry of Justice is, West Kings House Road. And there's also an interconnection along the boulevard where we transfer water from our St. Catherine systems into the city. Those supply also along the Spanish Town Road belt. So that is a kind of active water supply management where once we are beginning to see a decline with one system, we then move as best as possible to augment those supplies with whichever system can allow us a little buffer. Not a lot, because the reality is all the systems are showing decline, but just enough to help us so we do not have inequity of water supply where one area has 24/7 and then another area is clamoring once in 7 days for water supply. Obviously, when our systems show this level, we also have now been able to explore private partnerships. And so in St. Catherine, we're already purchasing water, additional water, to augment the NWC sources. And that has helped us to serve the Portmore area. Naturally, you're going to see customers, residents, stakeholders, a reduction And I'll tell you what that means for you. But we just simply do not have the same volumes. On a daily basis, Kingston, for instance, demands, and Mr. Stern will confirm with me, just above 40 million gallons per day. At this point, we're probably about 20 of that. Mona, at best, 8 million. Constant Springs, 6 million on a good day. On a good day. And the imports from the St. Catherine leg also just about 5 to 6 million. And so there is a reduction, which means that also we now have to taper our own individual water activities, whether it's bathing time, washing time. I wouldn't even mention car washing, because that's now becoming a matter which is not of necessity, if you want to put it in that way. All right? The other reality is that there may be lower water supply pressures on your network because we are simply regulating. And so a network that is always charged with water will give you better pressures than one where you're starting from zero every 12 hours. And so we're asking persons to bear with us in that. We will have, as a team at the NWC, have to increase nighttime regulations, valve operations, and that means that more of our teams will be seen on the road. At times we will have to operate even the hydrants. We do our best to put our cones and our signs there to say a hydrant is being flushed. And so I know there is going to be a heightened response in terms of persons reporting leaks. We also ask you to be mindful that our teams will try our best to have the signage there to indicate that this may not be a leak, but it's part of the operation to ensure that the lines do not become what we call airlocked, at which point no water gets to you in your home or your business place. Trucking is one of the next measures that we will naturally use. I will give you a breakdown of what our numbers look like across the parishes, and of course our contact numbers through our toll-free, which is 888-CALL-NWC, or our email address or our web chat allows you to access us as necessary to request for water. But we don't just tell you that there is a regulation. A part of the process is also to tell you what we've done leading up to those restrictions. A part of that is the rehabilitation of a number of well systems that exist here in the corporate area, but also in other places across. And we operate those periodically when the dry spell kicks in. So in Kingston, we have two in particular, the Cavaliers Well near Morisco Road and also the Beverly Hills Well at the foot of the Beverly Hills community, which gives us an additional 1.2 to 1.5 million gallons. Very, very precious volume at a time like this. And so these systems are now being brought on board to complement the demand that is on the network. I did speak as we advance our slides to talk through just to show you the distribution of trucking across the parishes. We do our best to ensure that trucks are available and where necessary we move them on. We talked, one of my previous presenters would have also spoken on the steps we take to ensure that water supply remains of the highest quality even when it is being trucked. And so I want to take the time to talk through two quick things. The persons, whether in-house team, NWC trucks, or the contractors, have to be certified. The trucker and also the trucks themselves are tested and sterilized and retested at intervals to ensure that water is of the utmost quality to you. There are some persons who will freelance during this time when there is a gap and a market for it. We ask you to check with either the NWC or the Ministry of Health to verify if your trucker has a certified unit delivering water to you. I hope that gets home. The other thing is that we do not collect cash from you when we deliver water, and I want that to be understood. All right? We do not collect cash when we deliver water. If there is a cost for the water delivered, it is applied to your bill. As we move on, I want to just pause to encourage us to fix the leaks where necessary or to report the leaks where they are not within your compound, because every drop simply counts. There are going to be opportunities in this time for us to get creative, and so we're looking forward to you perhaps even sharing on social media NWC Jam pages, how you are adjusting as we go through these changing times. The reuse of water where possible is critical. Grey water in our homes is sometimes quite abundant. The weekend is coming and washing will happen. Take the time to use this water where possible. But the more critical thing is that with the coming lock-offs, you're going to have periods when you need water and there is none in the pipe, which means your storage is going to be now necessary. It can be a 5-gallon jug. It can be a plastic drum that you got from foreign, and you're going to now sterilize it and reuse it, or it can be one of the standard storage tanks that you are able to purchase. Whatever it is, the best practices are you sterilize, you put it at a place where it does not become contaminated, and you utilize it as best as possible. During those times, we generally encourage persons have at least 2 to 3 days. In fact, some places will recommend 5 days, but with a reality that you may, for any unforeseen reason, have a disruption just when your supply time would start. It means that if you have some water that can take you through 2 days, it helps very much. And of course, report any leaks that you may find on the network. All right, I did speak on the availability of trucks. I spoke to the matter of just your response as a customer. But I want to talk a little bit about just how we build resilience and what the NWC has done over the last number of years. The Portmore NRW program is currently yielding 3 million additional gallons of water from when the program initially started 4 or so years ago. What that means is that there are more homes now moving from 20 hours per day to greater than that, close to 24 hours. We're not saying there may not be instances of low pressure, but it means there are more persons having water all the time in their pipes. The Rio Cobre treatment plant, we visited that one yesterday. It is now on the horizon for completion for May of 2027, which means we have an outlook that says after this drought, and perhaps before the other one gets very bad, we expect to have 15 million gallons of additional water coming into St. Catherine and Kingston. Then we go west because we want to ensure that you appreciate that the network and the work of the NWC is an all-inclusive one. So the Western Resilience Water Project is covering 4 parishes, Trelawney, St. James, Hanover, and Westmoreland. At present, there is work to cover 2 sections extending into 65 kilometers of pipeline, and that again will bring greater improvement in water supply to approximately 110,000 customers along this entire belt. Right? Let's talk, for instance, again about the Roaring River, which is a second or subsequent phase of the same Western Resilience that is expected to upgrade Roaring River, move water from Sav through the Western Belt, Southern Belt, all the way into Negril. And there are obviously some key projects like the one on the bottom of your page or your screen that says Monroe Wellington, which also starts its next phase this Monday. And while you're going to tell me and call a number of our offices and say, boy, Mr. Williams, the road and the traffic, we're asking you to understand as we work as quickly and as less obtrusively as possible to put in a piece of pipeline that is very, very important both for drinking water, but also to safeguard wastewater, which has a knock-on effect for the wells that are in Kingston that we can't use now. But hopefully with more central sewers being put in place, we can allow Mother Earth to, renew herself and bring back a number of these wells to us. The Ferry to Rock Pond program is also another one, and I think what that basically just encapsulates for us is that we are here at a drought, serving you in so many ways, serving you in trucking, serving you in regulations, serving you in providing the best response and the best updates possible. But we're also telling you and confirming with you that our steps to safeguard water and resilience over the next few years is also well very well on its way. I think as I pause, we'll allow at the appropriate time for a number of questions to come, and I will now take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams is a Corporate Public Relations Manager at the National Water Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, the takeaway from that presentation is conserve, conserve, conserve. Water is life, valuable product, so we have to protect it. If you see water running down the street near you, simply call the NWC's toll-free line. You can also send a message on their Instagram or other social media platform. So it's important that we carry out our civic duties. So what we have realized also is that the government, through this ministry and its key agencies, are providing support during these periods for communities. We have provided water to constituencies and tanks. All right, so Mr. Williams would have also shared with you the government's thrust to build resilience in the water sector by advancing these projects, the Ryakobri Water Treatment Plant project, which, by the way, Minister, myself, and the team toured yesterday, and I can report to you that significant progress is being made. The project is ahead of schedule. It is slated to be completed next May. The Western Water Resilience Improvement Project, which we toured earlier this month, and I'm happy to report that that is also on track to be completed. So, ladies and gentlemen, the ministry is doing a lot. Expansion of the Hermitage Dam is to come. Improvement to downtown Kingston in terms of the pipes and so on. So we're building resilience, but it takes time. It takes effort. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I'll now call on our hard-working Minister of Water, Environment and Climate Change, Honorable Matthew Samuda, MP.
Thank you, Permanent Secretary Robertson. Allow me to acknowledge the senior members of your team here at the Ministry of Water, Environment and Climate Change. Of course, thank you to those who would have presented before, Mr. Thompson from the Met Service, Peter Clark from Water Resources Authority, and of course Delano, who would have just completed his presentation from the NWC. The most important slide you would have seen in the updates before, and this is for the members of the media and certainly for those who are watching at home, is the slide with the projected rainfall. That slide said that we're going to have a dry August, a dry September, and a dry October. That is unusual and speaks to the climate variability and the impacts that we're experiencing from climate change. Jamaica traditionally has a bimodal rain system, meaning our peak is usually in May, and then the big peak month is towards the end of September going into October. So you have 2 periods of heavy rainfall that tend to recharge your aquifers, recharge your rivers, allow us to build storage and capacity at our NWC and rural water systems managed by parish councils. We would have received that brief and a far more detailed one this morning in the Integrated Water Resources Management Council. And for those who are not familiar with this, this is a council of cabinet where all stakeholders in the water sector, including academia, municipalities, agriculture, Ministry of Health, Security, are indeed represented. We'd have received very detailed briefs this morning in terms of where we are, which has informed some decisions that we have made. To note, the Drought Management Committee of Jamaica is a subcommittee of this council. Coming from that report and from the forecasts of the Met Service and the assessments of the WRA, it is clear and should be clear to all Jamaicans that conservation is indeed imperative at this stage. Now, we also have to contemplate where we are, not just in the usual rainfall cycle, but where we are in our calendar. In September, schools reopen. Schools are heavy consumers of potable water. As such, we are first encouraging conservation, but being very clear that as at August 10th, and I want members of the media to be very clear on this, as at August 10th, if the situation has not changed, meaning if the Met Service's evaluation of rainfall in July is as we suspect, that we had continued declines in rainfall. And if the forecast for the rolling 3-month forecast has not changed or has worsened, prohibition orders will come into effect. Prohibition orders speak to specifically irrigation and watering of gardens, lawns, grounds, and farms, filling or supplying of pools and other things for domestic services, washing of cars would be prohibited, watering and washing of roadways, and any purpose that would require unusual or non-essential use of water. No, it is not that the systems and the storage are at critical levels today, but the rainfall that would normally come at the end of August is not projected to be experienced. And as a country that would have gone through significant learning loss associated with the COVID pandemic, the disruptions of Hurricane Beryl, Tropical Storm Raphael, and Hurricane Melissa, we simply cannot afford water to contribute to learning loss in September. So we will take the measures that we absolutely need to ensure that we're able to safeguard the opening of schools in September and not contribute to learning loss. So that needs to be understood. We do hope that the situation will change, but with the information that we have, this is the best decision that we can make at this stage. Now to note, and I want to go into some details of what we've already done and the next steps in our response. Firstly, 2 weeks ago, the ministry would have allocated $86 million to members of parliament for trucking in their respective constituencies. The trucking would have been split up proportionally based on the data that we would have had related to rainfall in June, so that they would have been split based on who would have had the worst issues. That's step one. Step two, we have recommenced the distribution of black tanks that will be distributed through members of parliament and the SDC into areas of serious water scarcity, and especially in areas where, because of poverty levels, they'll be least likely to be able to afford the trucking of water. So we put the storage into those areas as a critical component. Now to note, yes, the government would have allocated and deployed $86 million thus far to support trucking. But as at August 10th, if the situation prolongs for 3 months, it is estimated that the cost of drought response will be in the range of $500 million. How that is to be allocated if the situation warrants it will be approximately $100 million of trucking monthly. That would be split evenly between the MWECC, who would service critical infrastructure including hospitals, health centers, schools, police stations, etc. It would be split between members of parliament managing areas within their constituency that have particular elevation, so may have pressure issues or have other issues in terms of getting water supply to them, and would be supplemented by the parish councils working outside of the utility footprint. We are in preparation to deploy that capital starting on August 10th, if the situation holds as is. There's another step that we'll be taking to significantly improve drought response this year over previous years. And that step is the immediate construction of an additional 30 loading bays in proximity to wells. Some of these wells are held by private individuals, some of them are held by other state agencies, including UDC and Jamaica Bauxite Mining Limited. Now, what this does, and I'll use an area that I'm familiar with. When you have a loading bay in Discovery Bay and a loading bay in St. Anne's Bay, and you have a challenge in Brownstown, the traffic time or the transport time is simply too long, and it reduces the amount of trucking that a trucker can do or a single unit can do into the hills of St. Anne. So you need a loading bay in sections such as that. The same would go for Manchester. If you have to go into central Mandeville to have, or to Gutters to load, the areas in between, the transport time is simply too long. So putting in additional loading bays and increasing the hours, allowing for trucks to be loaded overnight to facilitate early morning deliveries, we believe will significantly reduce the impact. Now, a lot needs to be understood about where we are today. For members of the media, if they go into their archives, they'll note that this is an unusual conversation for this time of the year. Usually we have this conversation sometime between late February and late March, because that is the driest period in Jamaica's usual rainfall pattern. But beyond that, there's been significant work done. And what usually happens after you have this conversation is the first reaction is, Lord, every year. But to note, it's not every year for the simple reason that we've been able to supply water with far greater regularity and efficiency at the start of the year than we have in previous years. There are two statistics I'd like members of the media to consider. One, in 2015, Kingston and St. Andrew and Portmore had non-revenue water, which means line losses of approximately 71%. Kingston and St. Andrew today has line losses or NRW scores of 38%, and Portmore approximately 40%. So we've cut the leaks in half. So that has significantly reduced not just line losses but water consumption that would have been measured previously. Now, what does that mean? Because the conversation then comes to, well, look at the construction and the development in Kingston. Did we have the water supply that we needed? Well, I'm happy to report that today, Kingston and St. Andrew uses uses 10 million gallons less per day than it did in 2015 with all the development that you've seen. So by cutting the line losses, we actually require less water in Kingston and St. Andrew to supply demand. The second statistic that I'd like you to consider, especially because the drought is most affecting the eastern parishes, is that in 2022, in February, the driest February we've ever experienced in Kingston and St. Andrew, we only received 17% of our 30-year average rainfall, meaning almost none. So in your driest month, you had even less rainfall than normal. And in that period, we were short 12 million gallons a day between Kingston and St. Andrew and Spanish Town to supply demand. The reason we have pursued the Rio Cobre water treatment plant is because it will supply some 15 million gallons along that corridor. So for instance, the argument that this is an every year thing, I understand the frustration that would lead to that position. But we're in a far stronger position today than we've been in previous years, and we will be, as of May next year, be in a much stronger position than we are today. So what does that mean? It means likely you will have a rough 3-month period now with the expected reduced rainfall. And it is possible you could go through one more drought, beginning February to April of next year, as is normal, where we have challenges. But as of May next year, we are certain that there will be a level of resilience that has never been experienced in our water supply in Kingston, St. Andrew, Portmore, and St. Catherine. We're also doing significant work on critical infrastructure in St. Mary. We're doing significant work on critical infrastructure in Portland, and we have significant upgrades coming in St. Thomas. Now, that is absolutely critical because the cost of trucking in these areas far exceeds the cost of trucking in your urban centers. So some of the areas that will be most affected are those who are least able to deal with it. And that is why we have been very careful and deliberate about outlining a plan that should we have to allocate and spend that $500 million, we are in a position to do so, and we have a careful rollout strategy associated with same. Ladies and gentlemen, we're investing at an unprecedented rate, and that investment is specifically to reduce the number of times that I have to address you on these matters and to ensure that indeed we are a far more water resilient nation tomorrow than we are today. I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. I'm sure you would have taken note of the presentations culminating in Minister's remarks. And the takeaway, particularly from the Minister's presentation, is that, yes, we are providing relief. We are providing relief to communities across the island, but we are simultaneously making sterling efforts to build resilience in our water sector. And that resilience building is manifested in the myriad projects that are in the pipeline and those that have already started. And we have spoken to those already. The Rio Cobre Water Treatment Plant project, the Western Resilience Water Improvement Project, the plans to expand the Hermitage Dam, and a myriad of other projects. Just one, another in the pipeline is the ferry to Rock Pond pipeline project. So that is in the pipeline as well. Close to that's on the cusp of coming to reality. So there are several things being done by the ministry, and we have a duty to provide relief to those in need by providing water to those in, I would say, vulnerable communities, those persons who need access to water, potable water. And so we are providing that support, and we will continue to so do. Just to also share with you, very important data, is that in Kingston, we have noted, based on the records shared with me, July 26, we have recorded hottest temperature for the year so far, 34.9 degrees Celsius. And in Montego Bay, at the Donald Sangster International Airport, the hottest temperature recorded in the West is 35.1 degrees Celsius. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is not business as usual. So we urge the members of the public, many of whom are watching at this time or listening, to conserve the precious commodity. Do not waste water, right? Conserve it, protect it. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I will now open the floor for any questions that may be posed by members of the media.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abigail Bartley from Nationwide News Network. I have just one question for Minister Samuda.
Yes.
It's regarding the tour he did, I believe it was yesterday, with Major General Anthony Anderson at the Hermitage Dam. I wanted to just find out how that tour went and if you could just expound on any key takeaways from that tour at the dam.
All right, so that tour was actually on Wednesday at the Hermitage Dam.
Okay.
The Hermitage Dam is a 99-year-old facility. It was built with a 50-year engineering guarantee. It was built for a city and parish that had a much smaller population than it currently does. It was built at a time where climate change was not yet a reality, or certainly this pace of climate change was not a reality. There is no possibility of guaranteeing stable water supply in Kingston and St. Andrew without Hermitage, based on the hydrological flow of rivers in and around the parish. So that means the government has to make what you call a nation-building investment in rebuilding and expanding the Hermitage Dam. That has an initial assessment of a $250 million US dollar price tag. That project will be guided through NARA, which is why we took Ambassador Anderson to the facility to get him to understand exactly what was in place and what was the current situation there. And that is a project that we expect to get underway early next year. Engineering and initial engineering assessments have already been done. We're actively developing the project, and that will be a project that the ministry will work on with NARA to build water resilience for Kingston and St. Andrew. Now, to note, there are 3 major capital works projects that are already underway in Jamaica. 1, the Rio Cobra Water Treatment Plant, $92 million US dollars. 2, Phase 1 of the Western Resilience Water Program, $170 million US dollars, which will see pipelines run from Martha Brae all the way to Negril. That project has started and is in the construction phase. And anyone who is driving along the road in Mobay or certainly Lucy should see activity taking place. And 3, we have completed the engineering phase and the land acquisition phase associated with the Pedro Plains irrigation system, which will see some $200 million US dollars spent over the next 3 years in building water resilience for the farmers in St. Elizabeth. Now, those are big numbers. But 3 years ago, myself and then Minister Nigel Clark, prior to his departure, engaged the World Bank water sector experts. And we had them come do a study in Jamaica to see really what was required for us to supply ourselves in a resilient and efficient manner on the potable water side and on the irrigation side. We also had them take a look of what was required for us to protect our water resources and our nearshore environment with appropriate wastewater management. The assessment was that Jamaica needs to invest $5 billion US. So though this year the government is investing $15 billion from the consolidated fund, you should be very clear that we still need to invest at a far greater rate. It is why investments like the Hermitage Dam and others have to happen very quickly. Because for us to catch up on what we absolutely need to do, we don't have a lot of time, as the rate of climate change is indeed going to continue to affect us. Any other questions for me so that I can then hand over to anyone that you want to question on a technical basis? Any questions from our online? Yes?
Minister, well, I was going to pose a question to Mr. Williams, but you might be able to answer. Alicia Willis from The Observer,
Sure.
sorry. He mentioned that so far in terms of drought management measures, we're already purchasing, or the NWECC is already purchasing from private suppliers for St. Catherine. Wanted to know the amount that has been expended there, and if possible, what's been budgeted for that kind of activity. Also, in terms of requests for private trucking, how many of those have come in so far?
Could you explain your last question a little clearer for me, please?
So there have been requests to the NWECC from citizens for water to be trucked. So I wanted to know if that's been tabulated, how many requests have been received so far?
Okay, so to your first request, one of the ways that we're building in resilience into the network is that we've asked the Water Resources Authority to look at all the abstraction licenses in the country. There are a number of industrial customers who have wells on properties associated with manufacturing. There are a number of agriculture operators and large farmers who also have their own water sources that feed their farms. There are a number of private suppliers of water that from decades ago have had licenses to do a certain amount of distribution. That would include a large private supplier, certainly in St. Catherine by way of Kankara. It would include Rose Hall Water Services in St. James, and would include UDC, who have two systems, one in Runaway Bay and one in Caymanas. Those would be your four major ones. There are some small ones that would have, applied for their own licenses to distribute within housing scheme development, etc. But for the most part, those would be your large ones. What we analyzed was looked at who was not using the full capacity within their abstraction licenses. So what we've been doing is making the rounds and negotiating bulk water purchases from those who have additional capacity and connecting it to the NWECC network. The first one that is complete is indeed Kankara. Kankara assessed that they had 5 million gallons of unused capacity of treated water that meets national standards. So we have interconnected the network that they have with an inflow point on the Portmore side of the parish border, which allows us to, in times of drought, pull on Kankara for an additional 5 million gallons. So that has, been a very beneficial relationship. I believe that arrangement was signed sometime last year. If you want, we could pull the specific numbers in terms of how much we've had to pull and what the cost is. But there's a standard bulk water purchase rate, which is set by the OUR. All of these private arrangements are subject to the oversight of the OUR and stay within the bulk water rate, which is set as the national tariff on an annual basis. So that is a pretty standard arrangement. But we are pursuing the UDC in terms of their unused capacity as well, especially in Runaway Bay. We don't quite have a capacity issue on the Portmore side, so where they had that additional capacity is not quite necessary for us. And we are in negotiations with other private suppliers to connect where there is unused capacity to build resilience in our systems. That said as well, we are working very closely with the WRA and the NIC to look at unused agricultural supply, because there are many areas that are indeed under stress, but there are areas with unused supply. So we're working with them to ensure that the appropriate agency in government has the extraction license. If there is no plan for farming expansion in a particular area and they're the holders of license, it will make sense for either NWC or any of your small municipal systems to get access to that water. So we're doing a realignment and a full assessment of the network. As it relates to your trucks, the nature of it, Alicia, is that your network in the country was built before you and I were born. It is past its useful life. As such, we have line failures every day. It is why the government has pursued a non-revenue water partner for national non-revenue water activities that will expand the pilot program that ran over the last 10 years in Kingston and St. Andrew and Portmore that cut leaks in half. That process is undergoing its final evaluation to appoint a contractor or contractors who will deal with this. This process is in partnership with the World Bank Water Sector team. We expect to be able to appoint a contractor or contractors later this year to get started on the next 10-year phase, which will see all urban centers in Jamaica going through NRW reduction activities. Now, why all of that long answer? Because very simply, a pipe breaks every day, and when the pipe breaks, we have to truck in those areas. So even in times of plenty, as it relates to rainfall, all trucks are employed every day. It would be very difficult to give you those numbers, but I do commit to taking a look at it and seeing how much more we could give you. But I assure you that all trucks work every day. No questions from TVJ? All right, well, I don't know if I should say, are there any questions for any of our technical team, being Evan Thompson, WRA, or NWC? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for coming at short notice and want to assure you that our next press conference will get underway at the advertised time. We are still a new ministry and we're still in the process of setting up infrastructure, so I apologize for the delay earlier this morning. Thank you.